AITA for taking the ring back and leaving her over toxic marriage rules. I am 30 years old and a medical resident at a busy hospital in Chicago. It is not an easy time in my life. My days often start before the sun rises and end long after everyone else has gone to sleep. Between the endless shifts, complex cases, and weighty decisions, my daily life does not leave much room for rest. Despite all that, I always believed these sacrifices were meaningful, as long as I had something stable to come back to at the end of the day, something that brought me peace. I met Natalie a little less than a year ago in a situation that seemed almost too good to be true. It was during a trip. I had finally managed to save up a few days off and decided to break from my routine. I needed to breathe, to disconnect a little, to clear my head. The destination was chosen almost on a whim, but as luck would have it, I booked a spot on a guided group tour through Yellowstone National Park. She was also traveling alone. I remember our first conversation was completely spontaneous, with no ulterior motives or pretense. At first, we were just talking about the tour itinerary, about the poorly planned and tiring schedule. Then, without us realizing it, that small, casual remark turned into a discussion that lasted for hours. What was surprising was that as we talked more, we discovered we were from the same city, Chicago, and from that point on, everything changed. Suddenly, this connection that could have remained a simple travel memory had a real chance of continuing after we returned. It was no longer just a fleeting interlude. There was a concrete possibility that this story could take root in real life. Natalie was 28. She worked as an interior designer at a firm in downtown Chicago. She had a way of speaking that was direct and self-assured, but never aggressive. She expressed herself well, with clarity and confidence. She gave the impression of knowing exactly what she wanted. At that time, everything about her inspired a sense of stability in me. She did not seem impulsive or disorganized. On the contrary, she appeared to be a structured, composed person with well-defined goals. During that trip, we grew incredibly close. We shared almost everything: meals, sightseeing, travel, and long evening conversations. We talked about our families, our pasts, and what we hoped to build one day. I did not see any obvious red flags. Nothing that should have made me back away. So, once we were back in Chicago, it seemed natural to keep seeing each other. The transition was effortless. We went from being two strangers who had met on a trip to two people who were dating regularly. A few months later, we were officially a couple. From the beginning, the relationship moved quickly, not in a confrontational way, but in the speed with which everything fell into place between us. Several of my friends pointed it out. They kept telling me I was moving too fast, that I still needed to get to know her, that I should not rush. I listened to them, of course, but I did not take their warnings very seriously. From my perspective, it was not impulsiveness. It was almost a logical decision. I am not someone who likes to waste time in vague or endlessly hesitant relationships. When I see real potential, I prefer to invest sincerely rather than circling around for years. And with Natalie, I thought I saw that potential. She was attentive, present, and meticulous about certain details. When she could, she would accompany me. She understood, or at least gave the impression of understanding, the demands of my profession. She never made a drama out of my hours. She never asked for more than I was able to give at that moment. And for me, that was incredibly valuable. Little by little, I began to build an image of her in my head, a sort of internal narrative where she naturally took the place of a long-term partner, someone with whom I could genuinely build something serious. After 6 months, I had already considered the idea of marrying her. After 8 months, I was convinced. I know it sounds rushed, and it probably was. But when you are inside that kind of situation, everything feels coherent. Every small gesture, every thoughtful act, every pleasant moment becomes a confirmation that you are on the right path. There was another element that heavily influenced my decision: my environment. Many of my colleagues are in unstable relationships or are completely alone. This profession consumes so much time that it leaves little space to build anything solid. So, seeing a relationship that seemed to work, that was moving forward without constant conflict, without chaos or tension, felt like a rare opportunity. An opportunity one did not want to let pass me by. That is when I made my decision. I was going to propose to her. It was not an improvised gesture. I planned everything carefully. I wanted the moment to be special, to be meaningful. I spent several $1,000s on the ring, not to show off or to impress anyone, but because I wanted it to symbolize something serious, a real commitment. I also thought about the location. I decided to take her for a weekend in Paris. It was not just another romantic getaway. In my mind, it was a transition, a way to close one chapter of our story and open a new one. I had chosen a quiet spot, away from the noise, a place where we could talk without being disturbed, where the atmosphere itself would help the moment unfold naturally. At that point, we had been together for 11 months. 11 months, said aloud, is not a long time. But at that specific moment in my life, it felt like enough. And overall, the trip went exactly as I had imagined. We walked, visited beautiful places, and shared real time together. Natalie seemed happy. I was too. There was no tension. Everything seemed to be in balance. On the last day, I decided it was the right time. I had already picked out the exact spot. Something discreet. I did not want a public scene, no onlookers, no forced applause. I preferred something simple, intimate, real. I remember that moment perfectly. I was not nervous, as you might imagine. What I felt was more like clarity, as if this decision had already been made deep inside me a long time ago. I asked her to sit down. I told her I wanted to talk to her. I took out the ring. I explained what I felt without a grand speech, without unnecessary theatrics. I am not the type of man to make long, dramatic declarations. I was direct. I told her I saw her as my life partner, that I wanted to build something stable with her, and that despite the short time we had been together, I had a feeling she was the right person. There were a few seconds of silence. Then she smiled and said yes. In that instant, everything seemed to align. I felt that I had made the right decision, that the entire journey since we met had naturally led to this moment. But what followed, I absolutely did not see coming. Natalie, with the ring still in her hand, did something that completely threw me off. She took a folded piece of paper out of her bag. At first, I thought it might be a symbolic detail, a letter perhaps, something emotional that would complement the moment. But no. She unfolded the paper with absolute calm, held it in front of her, and then said to me in a perfectly serious tone, "Before we continue, I need you to read this." I remember frowning, completely lost. I had no idea what was happening. "What is it?" I asked. "A few rules," she replied, "for the marriage." The way she said it left no room for humor. There was no irony, no lightness, no hint of a joke. She was being completely literal. I initially thought it was some kind of game, a strange ritual, something symbolic or even vaguely amusing. But when she handed me the paper and I started to read, I understood immediately that there was nothing symbolic about it. It was a list. 10 points. 10 numbered rules. The first one said, "You must always put your wife before everything else." I paused for a few seconds, not because the idea of prioritizing one's partner seemed strange. Many people think that way, but because of the wording. It was not presented as a shared value. It was a command. I continued, "The money will be shared, and everything that belongs to you will also belong to me." At that point, a more distinct unease set in. This was not a proposal for joint financial management. It was a unilateral declaration. I moved on to the next point. "You will have to pay for all your wife's beauty expenses, since you are the one who will enjoy the result." At that moment, I looked up for a second. Natalie was watching me, waiting for a reaction, but I said nothing. I kept reading. "You will be allowed to see your friends twice a year for 6 hours. The date will be chosen by your wife." This rule was no longer just awkward. It was becoming absurd. It did not fit the image I had of her. It also did not fit the relationship we had had up to that point. And yet, the worst was yet to come. The next point destroyed what little will I had left to try to rationalize all this. "You will quit your job because there are too many female nurses. You will look for a hospital with no female nurses." I stopped dead, not because I did not understand the words, but because I needed a moment to process what I had just read. I am a doctor. My work environment includes female nurses, female doctors, administrative staff, mixed teams. It is a naturally diverse setting in any major hospital. The idea that one could just erase that was not only absurd, it was impossible. I looked up again. This time, I was no longer just intrigued. I was torn between disbelief and a very clear alarm. "Are you serious?" I asked. Natalie nodded without the slightest hesitation. "Of course. These are basic conditions. That was the word that changed everything. She was not talking about a discussion. She was not talking about a mutual agreement. She was talking about conditions, and I had not even read half of them yet. There were still 5 rules left, and given how the first ones were written, I could already guess the rest would not make things any better. That is not realistic, I finally said, pointing to the part where she demanded I change my professional environment. I cannot just transform my career like that. It does not work that way. Natalie did not seem surprised by my reaction. On the contrary, her expression was calm, almost prepared. Yes, you can, she replied naturally. There are hospitals where that kind of atmosphere does not exist. That kind of atmosphere? I asked, though I already understood where she was going with this. Where there are not so many women around, she answered. A military hospital, for example. I let out a small laugh, not a mocking one, but a laugh of pure disbelief. To work in a military hospital, you have to be a military doctor, I replied. That requires years of specific training. It is a completely different path. It is not a decision you make overnight. She looked at me without changing her tone. Then get trained for it. That sentence carried a particular weight. It was not a suggestion. It was not an idea we were exploring together. It was yet another constraint packaged as a solution. Do you even hear what you are saying? I asked, this time with more firmness. You are asking me to completely redo my career after years of study and sacrifice simply to satisfy an insecurity that belongs to you. It is not an insecurity, she retorted. It is a way to avoid problems later on. What problems? I pressed. Infidelity, temptations, she replied as if it were obvious. It is better to be proactive. I slowly shook my head. You do not build a marriage by eliminating the outside world, I replied. That is not prevention, it is control. She did not react to the word control. She simply crossed her arms as if she were patiently waiting for me to finally understand. I looked at the paper again. I was no longer reading it with the same frame of mind. At first, I was surprised. Now I was tense. Still, I continued. Point 6 said, you will stop talking to all the women in your family. Only your mother will be allowed, and only under your wife's supervision. This time, I did not even take the time to finish the sentence in my head. I looked up immediately. This is getting completely ridiculous, I said bluntly. What does that even mean? Not talking to the women in my own family. Natalie still did not seem uncomfortable. It is to avoid unnecessary conflicts, she replied. Families often interfere in marriages. Setting boundaries is one thing, I countered. Cutting ties is another. You are telling me I cannot talk to my cousins or my aunts anymore. Exactly, she cut me off. Only your mother, and preferably when I am present. That makes no sense, I snapped, now clearly annoyed. You are trying to isolate me. It is not isolation, she responded. It is protection for the couple. You do not protect a relationship by destroying everything else, I retorted. That is not healthy. She sighed as if the problem was with me, as if I were the only one not seeing something obvious. Look, if you do things correctly, there will not be any problems, she said. It is just a matter of organization. Organization. That word again. As if reducing another person's existence to a set of restrictions could be presented as a simple management method. I lowered my eyes to the paper, feeling the discomfort slowly turn into anger. I continued reading, and that is when she added, almost gently, look it up, my love. It is scientifically proven that 20% of men feel an attraction to a family member, especially an aunt or a cousin. They are just waiting for the right moment to develop inappropriate feelings. And your cousins seem rather accessible, to put it mildly. This time, I jerked my head up. That is ridiculous, I said. And you? Do you seriously believe I am attracted to my cousins? I would rather not have to find out, she replied. Why are you so insistent on this? I asked. Unless there is one in particular who worries you. You are sick, I told her. She just smiled. Point 7 said, physical intimacy will only occur when the wife deems you have earned it. In case of non-compliance with the rules, the punishment will range from 1 week to 1 month without physical intimacy, depending on the severity of the offense. I exhaled sharply, unable to contain my reaction. Excuse me, I said, looking her straight in the eye. When I have earned it. Natalie remained perfectly calm. Yes, she answered. It is a way to maintain balance in the relationship. No, I replied almost immediately. That is using intimacy as a system of reward and punishment. That is not balance, it is manipulation. She frowned slightly, as if the word did not sit well with her. Do not take it that way, she said. It is just a way to motivate you to respect what we have agreed upon. We have not agreed on anything, I said, raising my voice slightly. You wrote all this without even consulting me, and now you expect me to just approve it after the fact. But these are logical things, she insisted. No, they are not, I countered. A relationship does not work like a point system where you win or lose access to something so important. She shrugged as if none of this was extraordinary. A lot of couples function like this, she replied. They just do not say it openly. That does not make it acceptable, I said. The atmosphere had nothing in common with what it was just a few minutes earlier. What should have been an intimate, powerful, and meaningful moment had turned into a cold, tense, almost administrative exchange. And yet, there were still more points. At this stage, I was no longer expecting anything reasonable. Point 8 said, you will not be jealous. If your wife goes out with male or female friends, you will not ask any questions. She will be allowed to go out once a week. I reread that part twice, just to be sure I had not misread it. That is contradictory, I finally said. You are forbidding me from any interaction with women in my life, including my own family. But you can go out with whomever you want, and I do not have the right to say anything? It is not the same, she replied immediately. Why would it not be the same? I asked. Because I know how to behave, she said with assurance. That answer made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so deranged. And I do not. I asked. That is not the point, she replied. It is just different. No, I countered. It is not different. It is a double standard. She shook her head as if I were too simple-minded to understand her logic. Men and women do not function the same way, she argued. It is better to set clear rules from the start. Rules that only apply to me, I replied. That is not true, she said. I am making commitments too. Like what? I asked. She hesitated for a moment. Then she said nothing, and that silence spoke volumes more than any sentence could have. I lowered my eyes to the paper. 2 points remained. By now, I was no longer lost. I understood perfectly what was happening, but I needed to see it through to the end. Point 9 said, if you wish to end the marriage, you will give me 100% of your money as compensation. There was not even a pause this time. That is insane, I said, unfiltered. No one in their right mind would agree to something like that. Natalie did not flinch. It is a guarantee, she replied. That way, you will be sure not to take the decision lightly. No, I retorted. It is a way to trap me. You are imposing an absurd penalty to prevent any possibility of leaving the relationship. If you do things correctly, you will have no reason to want to leave, she said. That is not the point, I replied. Any relationship should be able to end without one person having the power to ruin the other over a simple unilateral choice. It is proof of commitment, she insisted. No, I corrected. It is an extreme form of control. My voice was no longer calm, and she was starting to notice, though she still did not change her posture. There was one last point. I read it in silence. Your wife will be entitled to 1 night of freedom once a year. I looked up slowly. Explain that to me, I said with a calm that was almost unnatural after everything else. Natalie did not hesitate for a second. It is just 1 night, she replied. It is not supposed to be dramatic. It is a way to maintain excitement, to avoid monotony. Are you telling me you could do whatever you want on that night? I asked. Within reason, she replied. And me? I asked. No, not you, she said with the utmost nonchalance. You do not need it. A long silence followed. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because for the first time since this scene began, there was nothing left to discuss. The paper was still in my hands. 10 rules, 10 conditions, 10 different ways to turn a relationship into a completely imbalanced system. I looked at the ring on her finger. It sparkled just as it had a few minutes before, but its meaning had completely changed. It was no longer the symbol of a commitment. It had become the symbol of a mistake. Without a word, I reached for her hand. Natalie frowned slightly, visibly unsettled. What are you doing? She asked. I did not answer right away. I just took her hand firmly, but not roughly. Then, with a slow motion, I slid the ring off her finger. The gesture was simple, but its effect was immediate. "What are you doing?" she repeated, this time with an obvious tension in her voice. I looked her straight in the eye. This was a mistake. That sentence seemed to completely disorient her. "What?" she let out, almost automatically. But I said yes. "This is what you wanted." "No," I replied, shaking my head without looking away. "No, this is not what I wanted." Her face changed almost instantly. Confusion gave way to a kind of contained panic. "My love, why are you taking it off?" she asked, moving slightly closer. "I do not understand. You just proposed to me." "Yes, I did," I replied. "But I did not know who I was proposing to." She took a step back. "How can you say that?" she asked. "I am the same person." "No," I said. "The woman I thought I knew would never have handed me a list of conditions as if it were a one-sided contract." She shook her head, visibly disturbed. "You do not understand," she insisted. "I just wanted to secure our future." "Secure it how?" I asked. "By controlling every aspect of my life." "It is not control," she answered quickly. "It is organization, stability, a way to prevent problems before they happen." I let out a short breath. "You cannot call this stability," I said. "This is imposition. This is manipulation." She took another step toward me. "I knew you would not accept these rules easily," she admitted. "That is why I waited." That sentence hit me immediately. "Waited for what?" I asked, though I already understood. "For you to propose," she said. "I thought with the ring, you would accept them out of love." A brief silence fell. Not because there was nothing to say, but because what she had just confessed was exactly what I had feared. "So you planned this," I said, more as a statement than a question. "I thought about it," she replied, trying to soften her words. "It is not the same." "Yes, it is," I answered. "It is exactly the same. You deliberately hid this from me because you knew perfectly well what my reaction would be." "But that does not mean it is bad," she said. "Yes, it does," I replied firmly. "It means that even you, deep down, knew it was not reasonable." She fell silent for a moment, as if searching for another way to frame things. "I did it for us," she finally said, "because I want this to work." "This is not making a relationship work," I answered. "This is building a system where you alone decide everything." Her expression changed. It was no longer just insistent, there was now frustration. "And what about what I want?" she asked. "Does not that count?" "Of course it counts," I replied. "But not above my freedom, my job, my family, my choices, everything that makes up my life." "So you do not love me," she blurted out. The sentence hung in the air between us. I looked at her for a few seconds before answering. "No," I said finally. "I do not love this." Her eyes widened in shock. "You cannot say that," she protested. "After all this time." "All this time," I interrupted. "I thought I was with someone else." Her expression hardened. "You are exaggerating," she said. "They are just rules." "No," I replied. "It is a way of thinking. And it is a way of thinking I will never accept." The atmosphere was nothing like it was at the beginning. There was no trace left of the proposal, the trip, the illusion that had come before. There were only two people standing opposite each other, radically disconnected. I took a step back. "I am going back to the hotel," I said. She reacted immediately. "What?" she asked. "You cannot just leave like this." "Yes, I can," I replied. "No," she insisted. "You cannot leave me here after this." "After this," I repeated, "is precisely the most logical reason for me to leave." "You are being unfair," she snapped. "You are not even trying." "Trying what?" I asked. "To accept conditions that destroy any possibility of a healthy relationship?" She pressed her lips together as if to hold something back. "We could adjust them," she said. "Negotiate them." I shook my head. "This is not negotiable," I replied. "The problem is not one specific point. The problem is the whole thing." "So you are just going to throw everything away?" she said, her voice rising. "No," I answered calmly. "I am just avoiding locking myself into something that clearly does not work." A brief silence followed. "You cannot leave me like this," she repeated, her voice softer this time. "We are in another country. You are an adult," I replied. "You can manage." "That is not what I mean," she said. "I mean us." I looked at her one last time with a mix of clarity and disappointment. There is no us when it starts like this. I did not wait for her reply. I turned around and started walking. I did not look back. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if I were finally lifting a weight off my shoulders that I had not even been aware of until then. The journey back to the hotel was made in complete silence. I did not need to think too much. Everything was already clear. When I arrived, the first thing I did was sit on the bed. I took the ring out of my pocket. I looked at it for a few seconds. I did not feel sadness. I felt relief. Because even though that moment had been uncomfortable, brutal, and profoundly disturbing, it had been necessary. Sometimes, what looks like the right decision only needs a little bit of truth to fall apart. And in my case, that truth arrived at exactly the right moment, just before it was too late. Comment: I really hope this story resonated with you the way it did with me. One thing I keep coming back to is the importance of valuing your own self-worth. You should never have to shrink yourself or give up your freedom to make a relationship work. Setting healthy boundaries is actually a sign of real maturity and self-respect. Taking responsibility for your peace of mind is one of the most powerful choices you can make. When something doesn't feel right deep down, it is okay to trust that feeling. Walking away from situations that threaten your well-being is not giving up, it is choosing yourself. True healing begins when we stop accepting things that hurt our spirit. Always remember to treat yourself with the same kindness you offer others. I hope you carry this reminder with you and keep building the calm, respectful life you truly deserve. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.